My name is Kristen Butler. I'm the Director of Programs here at the Delaplane Arts Center, and I'm excited to welcome you all. Thank you all so much for braving the first real snowstorm of this winter, so we're glad to have you all with us. Today, of course, is the opening of the FCAA exhibition, which is the subject of our talk today, as well as a couple other exhibitions, which are work by Deborah Ambush, which is in the side gallery on this level, and an exhibition in the two galleries on the second floor by Anex Mercado. And I want to encourage everybody to make sure to take a little bit of time, maybe not today, maybe come back, depending on how you feel about the weather out there, and take a look at all of the artwork that's with us right now. Please also pick up a magazine, take a look at what we have coming up with our courses and our other exhibitions that are happening through the winter. So we'll be hearing from two FCAA members today. But first, I want to invite Vicki Clarkson, who's the immediate past president, to come up and tell you all a little bit about FCAA.
Thanks, Kristen. I'll make it brief. So, for those of you who may not know, the Frederick County Art Association has been a part of the community's art world maybe 45 years-ish, kind of going on 45 years, so it's been around for a while, and we have a vast membership. I would encourage anyone, novice to art enthusiast to working artist, etc. If you're not a member, look into joining us. We do provide a lot of resources and networking for directions you might want to take with your art pursuits. But today we are going to hear from two wonderful artists who are members, Robin Culkin and Paul Tooley. Both are very talented. Their work is in the galleries. You'll have a chance to walk around and get a closer look at those momentarily. But thank you again for coming out today. I genuinely appreciate all the support for the artists who have put their hard work on the walls today. So thank you very much.
So I'll go ahead and invite Robin Culkin to come on up. And I'll tell you a bit about her. She's been a member of FCAA for the past 5 years. A lifelong artist, Robin is a 1995 graduate of the Pear. I apologize. I should have asked you ahead of time.
It's a very small school. No one's
Pear College of Art in Hamden, Connecticut. Robin retired from her early career to be a stay-at-home mom to her 4 amazing children. When her oldest graduated from high school, Robin decided it was time to get back to her original career aspirations in the arts. In 2018, she established Robin Culkin Art Studios and has become an active and popular member of the art community throughout Maryland ever since. Her work has been featured in numerous galleries, murals around our communities, and through her growing business activities. Robin's style is a blend of traditional oil painting and illustration with a flair for whimsical stories. We've invited her to speak today to share how she creates her illustrative paintings.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Robin. I am not a public speaker, so I'm going to be very nervous. I usually like to hide in my studio where no one can see me. So again, I kind of skirt the fine line between fine arts and illustration. My degree was in children's book illustration, so when you see my work, it's very representative of that, and I just love that whimsical and motherly feeling of art. So the first thing I do is probably very different than most artists. I come up with an idea in my mind. I do not keep a sketchbook. I do not keep an idea book. When I come up with an idea, I immediately go to Canvas, which I know is very different than most people. I do all my sketching right on the canvas. My ideas come from everyday life with my family, with reading books, seeing things on YouTube. Inspiration just hits me from out of the blue. All of my work typically has some type of a story related to it. So when you look at it, you'll see characters and you'll be able to kind of come up with what the story is telling you. The pictures that I have up there, I do use reference, obviously free reference, for capturing the anatomy of the animals. It's something really important to me, is to make sure that the characters look like they're supposed to. I also come up with ideas for seasons, holidays, all different types of things. So anyhow. So again, as I told you, the first thing I do is I try to create the mood of the painting. Again, very differently than most, I go right to canvas. I like to cover the canvas 100% with a wash. I'm an oil painter, so I use the oil very differently than most. I thin it out very, very thin. It's almost like a watercolor technique. So I cover that canvas with the mood of what I'm trying to create. This painting, I obviously am trying to create something that's more magical, and I start with a very dark background. Next thing I do when I start sketching is I take a very large broad brush, and I just start putting in the background. Most of my art is woodland, so you'll see most of it has a landscape feeling to it. So again, I start with a brush, and I just start putting in shapes until I start deciding what I like, and then I work from there. And again, I just start adding different types of colors. So the background, I'll start doing lighter versions of the darks to start making depth. It all does come together. And then I start really deciding on the palette of the painting, or the colors of the painting, the composition, and which direction I'm going to go. Again, this one, the whole background is a very dark tone. And you'll see in the next slide why I keep the background very cold and very dark. So as I start coming up, finalizing the composition, I start deciding on the light source and I start adding the warmth into the work. You'll start seeing the warm colors coming through, and I start really adding in the warm highlights versus the colds. Again, I'm not a public speaker, so I apologize. So anyhow, the next thing I do is I start putting in the characters of my story. When I start laying in, I use a soft pastel stick, and I draw right over the background, which again, I know most people will be like, oh my God. And then after I am happy with the anatomy and placement of the characters and the expressions, I will then take a fine liner brush and really finalize their placement and put outlines of the animals. I also will then start really starting to add the light to the painting. I tell a lot of my clients I'm mostly a art show artist, so I do art shows all year, that I try to paint with light. So when you see the final paintings, you'll see that the light really grabs your eye and shows you the story. My final layers, what I try to do is add those brightest of brights, and you'll see it's really starting to come together to show you what you're supposed to be looking at. I add the final details. I make sure that all the expressions on the animals are doing what they're supposed to. And I really, again, try to capture the viewer's eye to really bring you into what I want you to see. And there's the final painting. And again, you can see how it kind of all came together. You can see that dark blue background versus the warms of the final painting. The light really will draw the viewer's eye in and lead you around the composition to help you tell the story. And the illustration, I think, really helps gives the mood of the characters and also the motion through the composition. So, and that's that.
I'm going to invite Paul to come up next. Paul Tooley works in watercolor. Let's skip over this spot here. Paul Tooley works in watercolor because of its freshness, spontaneity, and unique effects, and paints a variety of subjects in a loose and expressive manner. He is a member of the FCAA, the Baltimore Watercolor Society, and the Transparent Watercolor Society of America, and has exhibited his work at multiple locations in Frederick over the past 25 years. He was the grand prize winner in this year's Celebrate Frederick Holiday Art Competition with his painting, Boats on the Creek. He and his fellow artist, Craig Cabin, currently share a studio at the Griffin Art Center in number 6 West 5th Street in Frederick. Please welcome Paul Tooley.
Thanks, Kristen. Well, I didn't go to art school. I was an artist through my youth and up through high school. And when I went to college, I started studying science. So I moved to Frederick in 1985 to work at Fort Detrick as a plant pathologist, and had a long career in science, but I did art on the side all the time through my career. And finally, in 1998, I got a space at the Blue Elephant Art Center in the Griffin, what's now called the Griffin on 5th Street, where I interacted with other artists. We had a very nice art scene there. For about 10 years, it was sort of one permutation, and then it shifted over. But I've been there since then, and Craig and I, Craig Cavan here on the right, also an FCAA member. And we have open studio tonight, first Saturday from 5 to 8. So if there is a first Saturday, we'll be open. But as Kristen said, I choose watercolor because of its freshness, spontaneity, and looseness. This is a painting I did at the Nice Flower Market from a photograph I took on a trip to France. And I don't draw on the paper. This is watercolor paper, 22 by 30 inches, Arches or Strathmore or other brands I've used, 140 pound. And here's a big round sable brush to draw directly on the paper and add water and varying degrees of wetness and try to depict the subject, not in a representational sense necessarily. You can tell it's a flower market, hopefully, but I didn't go wanting to have it exactly true to the photograph necessarily. And that's sort of my philosophy of painting, is to keep it on the line between realism and abstraction, and to use the freshness of the medium, colors, the spontaneity that watercolor offers, in contrast to other media, which you put it and it stays. Watercolor, you put it and it moves, and you have to keep responding to painting through various degrees of wetness. And one of my favorite quotes that describes sort of my philosophy of art is this, by Georges Braque. There's only one valuable thing in art, the thing you can't explain. And so, as I would go through any art show, for example, this show, I haven't taken in yet, and ask yourself this when you see this show, go to each painting. And some, you have varying degrees of response, but when one really grabs you, and you go, oh my God, that's beautiful, that's amazing. What is that? Can you explain that? Probably not in words. It's just the aesthetic quality of that painting, of the shapes, the values, and the perhaps the subject matter. So that's kind of what I'm after, that je ne sais quoi, if you will, of a painting that really appeals to me. And I want to achieve that in my art. So my work is generally typified by my quest for beauty and my desire for spontaneity, yet adhering to the elements of strong design, composition, and I've taken workshops over the years, even though I wasn't formally trained in art. I've taken many workshops with watercolor instructors, nationally known, very well-known watercolor painters, from which I've gleaned, as well as through my reading, I've gleaned from these workshops the elements that I've taken into my artwork. So I'm going to focus on the painting that I have in this show, which is, I saw it through there, but you can't all see it. Some of you can. So this is the painting. It's called Looking Down East Church Street, 15 by 22 inches. And if you've been at the coffee company at that corner, and you turn around and look down East Church Street, this is the view. But this is my view. The photograph looks like this. And you can see that it appealed to me because it's a quintessential Frederick scene. It's an interesting view of the two steeples at the end of the road, sort of Frederick's identifying factor are the steeples. So I liked that it had steeples. I like the row houses. I like the straight ahead view, typical of Frederick architecture. But you'll see that the painting takes liberties with the facts of that photograph. In terms of the design elements, notice the band of dark trees that goes all the way across. I thought that was a strong design factor. Also, the whites of some of the vehicles that stand out, and the white of the steeples on the left side really stands out. But you can see that I definitely took artistic liberties. I made the steeples larger. I put more white into the vehicles to make that pop with the whites of the paper. That's unpainted paper. It's creating those whites. It's not white paint. And the dark massive trees that goes from left to right. And then the row of houses, it just really appealed to me, so that's why, and I would do multiple versions of this painting. But preliminarily, before I just go onto the canvas, and I admire the previous speaker a lot for going directly onto her canvas with her painting. I'm too chicken to do that. I have to have and the scientist in me also tells me, no, you must have a procedure. You can't just, it's got to be something more. So, luckily, I found a kindred spirit in a teacher named Frank Webb, who's a very, very well-known watercolor painter from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He passed away last year, unfortunately, in his late 80s, but he taught hundreds of workshops throughout the world. And I was lucky enough to have 3 workshops with him when he came to this area. And he indoctrinated us with what he calls his little value studies. These are small studies that vary in size from 3 by 5 inches up to maybe 8 by 10. And he does them in many different media. Graphite mostly, 6B, dark graphite, which gives you a very nice value range from a very light to a dark. And he stresses big shapes, and he works that out ahead of time. Then he actually uses a grid pattern, as you can see, to transfer that to his larger watercolor paper. So he takes, in the middle of class, he took his little sketch out of his notebook and made a grid right on his paper and transferred the drawing. And that was interesting to me because he was a professional commercial artist for many years for an airline company. And he is a dead-on world-class draftsman. So, I was curious, why is he using a grid? Well, probably save time and save erasing, but he could certainly draw it freehand if he wanted to. And then he ramps that up and then starts in with the lightest value, and then lets it dry off, comes in with the middle values, and then the darkest darks. So design was his really main focus, was Frank's design. He instilled that in us. So over the years, I don't always use a value study, but I find that if I don't use a value study or have something to shoot for, often I'll get into the middle of the painting and I'll kind of lose my way. As many artists I'm familiar with, I'm sure, get going, that's a little too light, I better darken it over here. And you get back, no, that's a little too dark, no, I've got to darken it, even it up. And you end up in this quagmire without knowing really where you're going. The value study allows you to know where you're heading, at least you have a vision of where you're going. So here's an example of one of my own value studies, based on this photograph, which, and my own aunt, and I took on a trip to Ireland. This is an Acula Island in the far west of Ireland. Acula, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But you can see my little gray value study using a color called Payne's Gray in watercolor, which gives a very nice range in values. And just playing around with the space and the shapes, I came up with this, what I find is a pleasing composition that I could paint a larger painting from. And you'll see that compared to the actual photograph, it's different. I accentuated the size of the village, of the houses, made them larger, put more white into them. I reduced the foreground to almost nothing. And I accentuated the mountains in the background. But I feel better about painting from this and creating a successful large painting than trying to stick 100% to the photograph. So again, my style involves a touch of realism, but really ranging over into the abstract shapes and values that I find create a more beautiful product and composition. So I'm sure I had a value study for the painting to show, but I couldn't locate it, so I showed this one. And I also use a limited number of colors, only about 7 colors, 2 reds, 3 blues, and 1 yellow, and a green. And then this is my palette, so you can also see that I don't mix my colors in the palette and then apply them to the paper so much as try to apply them to the paper so the colors mix on the paper. And that's a key feature of my style and watercolor in general. Apply the colors to mix on the paper rather than on the palette. So you can see the palette contains the raw colors and not so much of the, so it's a limited palette that I use. I'm going to go back and just, I'll look again at this photograph and think about the photograph of Ireland, and then look at the painting again and see how I morphed it. You can look into it and you look at it and say, oh, that's a Frederick's, and I like that, and there are the steeples. But it's really not a photograph, the accurate rendering of the subject matter. So that's nice. A bit about my process, my style. Any questions so far about the process and my style? Yeah.
Do you scratch inside your pieces sometimes to, like, through the paint to reveal some white underneath it, or?
I do. I have been known to do that, and it's a technique used by many watercolorists. I don't know. Yeah, you can see
Right.
here where I scratched in some lights with a stick or a balsa wood stick from the hobby store, or just a stick from a tree that I found on the ground. I can shape it, and I do scratch in. Also, that's another way of bringing back the whites. You can leave the white paper, and you can also scratch whites. And believe me, if you use a credit card, for example, you can actually scratch windows and much larger shapes. And if I could show you a greater range of Frank Webb's paintings, you would see that he does that and then some. He uses a lot of different techniques similar to that in his watercolors. So yes, scratching, even using a fingernail to scratch things in, or a pocket knife. So then I was just going to say this is the Griffin Art Center, where I began in 1998 at Blue Elephant, which is an upstairs portion of this art center. And that our studio is at number 6 West 5th Street. We're having a studio this evening. Craig working on one of those beautiful orchid paintings, and my part of the studio. And then in the hallway we have a gallery, so we display our works. We're fortunate to have a gallery space in the hallway as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we were to come to your thing tonight, do we need to bring anything?
No, just open studios. Just come in. On the corner are 2 other art galleries at 5th and Market Streets, a few blocks north of the main part of the downtown. And there's the Artist Gallery on the north side of the corner, and the NOMA North Market Gallery on the south side of that corner. And they are having an invitational ceramic show tonight, which I know the curator, Gary Schlapp, worked very hard to bring in 6 excellent ceramicists for their opening. And I'm sure they'll be disappointed that the weather is not cooperating for their opening. But
Wonderful show.
when you come to art, have you seen it? Oh, I'm sure we saw it. I saw it on Facebook photos. And so when you come to our little corner, you have 2 galleries plus there's often another show in the space next to us, and then we have our gallery. So it's a nice little artsy corner that you have to walk a few extra blocks to get there from downtown. And they've sold the building now, so it's going to be going away, unfortunately, made into apartments. But we think we have some time before they can get the permits and things. But perhaps at least a year that we can still be there. And then there are other efforts underway to find other spaces in Frederick. That's just a plug for our open studio. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions about my process or anything like that you'd like to ask. Thanks very much. Yeah.
As well, a question that's not nothing to do with the process or your particular work that you're proposing to that. I was just curious, how did you manage to, I'm also a food district scientist, and I'm seeing frequently in Bethesda and other places in DC, there's quite a bit of, second career scientists that paint, who paints and things like that. So I just wanted to know if you wanted to tell us a little bit more about that.
about mingling the two sort of.
Yeah, like there's a lady, for example, that does a lot of, she's Indian, does a lot of mandala inspired, mathematical inspired things, and you know, she's a physicist, things of that sort. So I'm always being super curious, because you see, I'm here and it snows and I'm not gathering for a reason. So like, it's gotta be some, I mean, I'm not an artist myself, but
Well,
if you wanna say a
Craig's
couple of things.
Craig and I work in the same lab at Fort Detrick, and he uses nature as a theme for much of his painting. We were both plant pathologists, so we also worked under powerful microscopes. We have visions of all these micro worlds that we have seen. And I don't tend to use those in my subject, but Craig uses those. Yeah.
This is just a comment. Isn't it like an outlet because you're so scientific and everything, and then you go to art and you're loose and you do whatever?
Kind of, yeah.
It's like
It's
an outlet.
interesting, and I've thought about it a lot over the years because, you know, I'm in there doing science and statistics, but yet there's creativity in what I'm thinking of my next experiment.
Right,
And,
of course.
And the woman in the next office to mine, Tina Shishko, who sometimes comes, is a wonderful scientist. She's also a wonderful artist. She does designs, Photoshop, she has a comic strip she puts on Facebook. She's very artistic. So the two worlds, and they say, if you look at the book by Betty Edwards, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, it's one of the best drawings to start with. She believes the brain is split into two sections. The left brain is the analytical, thinking, more mathematical portion, and the right brain is the more aesthetic, ephemeral, dreaming, you know, just the more ethereal part of the brain. And somehow they work together. Some people are more one than the other. But I found a lot of scientists are actually artists. And Craig and I were part of a show in Gaithersburg during the pandemic. Scientists who are artists. There were about 8 of us, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was a fascinating array. There was a physicist who did 3-dimensional sculpture. He's okay, he's going to do 3D, angular. But there was just a wide range of science. And I think it is an outlet. I think it's different from the work I might have done in the lab. But as I said, I had always been inspired by art since I was a kid, and kept it going kind of as perhaps more hobby than business. And of course, my bread and butter came from my science job all those years. But since being retired, since 2019, I have made art more larger part of my life. I haven't had to think about science really at all. So I've been able to branch out into new directions, as Craig would say he has as well. He's sort of left the barbed wire of Fort Detrick in the lab and the safety rules and all the stuff we used to hate about it. I believe it's Wednesday morning and we're in the studio painting. Wow. We would be in the lab meeting right now. You know? So we're really happy that we sprung from Fort Detrick. But it is an interesting comparison. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paul. Any other questions for Paul or for Rob? Either of our artists who spoke today. Well, if you do, are either of you sticking around? Okay, they're going to be sticking around for the informal artist meet and greet. So if you do have any questions you want to ask more privately, you're very welcome to do that here in just a little bit. Also, I forgot to mention that this exhibition, the Frederick County Art Association exhibition, they are doing a People's Choice. I was like, Visitor's Choice? That's not quite right. People's Choice. I'm doing a People's Choice. So if you are sticking around today, please go ahead and vote on that. The ballot box is in the next room. And if you're not, please come back and take a look and view all of the wonderful art that is on exhibition. I hope we see you all again very, very soon. Thanks so much for coming today.